I'm Amanda Uliano with Uliano Law, class of LT13, and the current chair of Leadership Tampa alumni. I want to thank everyone who is joining us on the webinar today. As we are all adjusting to our new normal, today's webinar is about caring for you and your families. We will be talking about how to move from surviving this crisis to thriving beyond it. Everyone is dealing with new stressors on a daily basis, and our goal is to provide you with some resources to help you and your family make it through this time even stronger than before. Today's event has two panelists that I'm thrilled to introduce. The first is Dr. Rick Weinberg. Dr. Weinberg is a licensed psychologist, diplomat in clinical psychology, and clinical associate professor in the Department of Child and Family Studies at the University of South Florida. Aside from his teaching at USF, in 2009, the Tampa-Hillsborough County Human Rights Council awarded Dr. Weinberg their Human Rights Award, cited for civil rights advocacy, involvement in local human rights organizations, community development in the Tampa Bay area, and along with several others for co-founding and developing the Hillsborough County Schools Crisis Intervention Team. Our second panelist is Dr. Shea, Quraishi, the Chief Academic Officer at Frameworks of Tampa Bay, a nonprofit organization that empowers educators, youth services professionals, and parents and guardians with training, coaching, and research-based resources to equip students of all ages with social and emotional skills. Shea is a former elementary school teacher, having taught in New York, California, Tennessee, and Florida. This morning, we've asked Rick and Shea to each give us a brief introduction to some of the issues they have experienced during this time. We will then be devoting the rest of our time to answering your questions. This Zoom webinar has a Q&A function. If there are any questions you would like to ask to the panelists, please type those in and we will get to as many of them as we can. Rick, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thank you very much, Amanda. And thanks to everybody at the Chamber and LTA for inviting me. We're going to put up I got about 7 or 8 slides here. And just to sort of preface my 5 to 7 minutes of fame, what I decided to do was not talk during this part about any thriving or coping strategies, but rather to give you, I've sort of figured the folks who are going to be a part of this are already pretty sophisticated and likely have looked up whatever sorts of information that you need. So what I decided to do was talk about what's going on in your brain during the stress of COVID-19 to give you a better idea, and so you could use your own ingenuity and your own intelligence to figure out, based upon this sort of foundational knowledge, the kind of strategies that would be best for you and for your family. So let's move on to the first slide. Go ahead. Let's talk about what's really going on in our brain. And we'll move to the next slide. There are really 3 parts of the brain. You know, our brains are just these amazing organs that we have that were evolved over time. We'll go back to the previous slide for just a moment. There are just hundreds of different parts of the brain. I'm going to focus only on 3 of them because they're really key to developing a strategy to better understand how we are affected by the stresses of COVID-19, and then how to move beyond the stress to really thrive, which I know is the theme of our workshop today. Okay, let's go to the first one. The first part of our brain that's pertinent here is something called the amygdala. The amygdala is something that we as human beings have, but not only do we have them, many species besides human beings have them. It's part of what's called our reptilian brain, or the primitive part of our brain. And it is the part of our brain that detects threat. Whenever there is something that we believe to be dangerous out there, our amygdala goes on like the 4th of July fireworks. It's 24/7, so even when we're sleeping, if we should smell smoke, God forbid, we wake up right away because our amygdala is saying, look out, there's something going on. It sends a message, the amygdala does, to our hypothalamus. That sends a message very quickly in like a 10,000th of a second to our pituitary and our adrenal glands, adrenaline, fight or flight. We then are prepared to handle whatever kind of circumstances or contingencies that are out there. The amygdala in many people, particularly those who have more of an impulsive personality or temperament, it's like quick. We don't even think about it, we just act very, very fast. Sometimes so fast that the amygdala deactivates the part of our brain that sort of thinks through and analyzes things quickly, and it just sort of overrides that. In fact, that will be the next part of our brain that we'll go to. Go to the next slide. One of the modulating parts of the brain, the main modulator, which is, next slide, the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex works hand in hand with our amygdala to determine what is the best action to take when we deem there is a threat out there. It's called the executive center of our brain. It engages in higher mental processes. It analyzes situations. It collects data. It utilizes our earlier history, our knowledge base, and determines what would be the appropriate action to take. And it acts quickly, sometimes within a tenth of a second. Our prefrontal cortex has that information, and it moves on to decide what we're going to do. So you can see this interplay between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala is really key. It's really important. And we're going to get back to that connection in just a moment. But before we do, let's go on to the third part of our brain that is crucial if we are going to thrive. So let's go to the next slide. This part of our brain is actually more than one part. It's sort of an area in our brain that's called the reward centers, or commonly called the pleasure centers. Next slide. There are a number of parts. I've circled the three main ones: the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, the nucleus accumbens, and the striatum. This is the part of the brain that gets turned on when we're feeling great, when we're feeling good, when we're feeling excited, like I'm feeling right now and talking to all of you. It gives us feelings of pleasure. It lifts us up. It's the part of our brain that sort of rewards whatever we're doing and says, this is fun. Let's do this again. And what makes those feelings felt and sensed in our body is a neurotransmitter that's called dopamine. The VTA actually manufactures the dopamine. It sends it to the nucleus accumbens and striatum, which then distributes the dopamine throughout our brain. And we feel then this really warm, nice feeling. It's palpable. We can sense it. Next slide. But what's really key to thriving during COVID-19 are not only these parts, but it's the connections in our brain that, for instance, link, we'll go to the next slide, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Let's talk about this for a minute because it's really important. If you can think of a 275, an interstate highway, and it's got traffic going one direction, then there's a median strip and traffic going in another direction. That's sort of what it looks like, sort of not literally, but figuratively, between our amygdala and PFC, prefrontal cortex. There are many people who have an overactive amygdala, and that's not particularly good. It happens either because it's from our DNA, we've inherited that tendency from our parents, or sometimes people, when they're young, they live in an environment where their parents are fighting all the time, or it's a dangerous neighborhood. And early on, the amygdala learns, I've got to scan my environment. I've got to be vigilant a lot. And because it's so dangerous, I need to send messages to my prefrontal cortex very, very quickly. And so what happens is the part of the highway, the lanes between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex expand to accommodate all of that information. And because there's only so much space in that pathway, what it does is it takes up the space between the prefrontal cortex over to the amygdala. So what you end up with is you end up with like 5 or 10 lanes of traffic going from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, and very, very little bandwidth moving from the prefrontal to the amygdala. So you've got this constant torrent of information. Things are dangerous. Look out. You better watch out. You're not going to succeed. This is going to be bad news. And you don't have enough bandwidth for the PFC to say, calm down. I got this covered. There's no danger. Let's move on. So a person is in fight or flight way, way too much of the time. The last thing I want to talk about is the connections between your pleasure centers and your prefrontal cortex. And let's go back a couple slides, if you will, please. One more. As you notice down at the, no, go forward one. If you notice, the connections between our prefrontal cortex and the pleasure centers, unlike that between the amygdala and PFC, it's not hardwired. Good parents promote the development of this particular neural pathway when they say to their children when they're 2 and 3 years old, oh, we are going to have so much fun. We're going to go to Disney tomorrow. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to have a great time. And after the event is over, boy, what was your favorite part of the beach? What was your favorite part of Disney? This sort of, we're not experiencing the pleasure in the moment, but we can think about the pleasure and it releases the dopamine throughout our brain. This is an extremely important characteristic, an extremely important neural pathway to have if we are going to thrive throughout our life. And it is not hardwired. It's something good parents develop. And I'm sure that Shea is going to be talking, perhaps indirectly, about development of this neural pathway. So let's move forward about 3 slides right now to conclude. Here are some things that people do because their amygdala is way, way too active that are harmful to themselves. It releases too much cortisol into our system, too much of the stress hormones. They do something called threat scanning. This is where the amygdala is saying danger, danger, danger. And so it's looking around for things that you actually fear. So it's the person who's taking his temperature all the time, the person who is drawn to listen to the news all the time. And these very things are activating that amygdala. A second thing is assigning danger to benign events. Thinking you've got the coronavirus when you only have a little scratchy throat or you've got an allergy headache. Catastrophizing about hypotheticals. Thinking, oh, I better not go to the store. What if I'm walking down the aisle and somebody sneezes when I'm in the store? These are consequences of an overactive amygdala. It's the kind of actions that your amygdala takes that deactivates the prefrontal cortex. Let's go to the next slide. These are things that people can do to help embellish or grow that pathway between their prefrontal cortex and the reward centers. First of all, you want to get good nutrition, good sleep, good exercise. Second thing is you want to savor things that you enjoy. Play a lot of music. Go to websites that John Krasinski website, some good news, and enjoy the humor, enjoy the goodness that things are out there. Help other people. People are making masks. People are doing scavenger hunts for the neighborhood kids. Preparing for post-COVID. My nephew is studying right now web design or some other technological things so that after this is over and he wants to get a job, he'll be better prepared. And the last thing, we don't have time to embellish it, but to have some deep, meaningful, intimate conversations with your loved ones. And then after you do each of those things, reflect on what you've done. Allow yourself to feel that dopamine. And when you do, last slide, when you do, you are strengthening those neural pathways between your prefrontal cortex and the pleasure centers. And this, over the long term, over your life, is going to be the best stress management tool you can have. You can create new neural pathways in your brain as long as you do this stuff over and over and over again. Last slide. If you'd like to read more about all of the things that I'm talking about, here are some really good books to read. We're going to send these slides, we're going to make these slides available to you after the webinar in case you'd like to go and learn more about these books, or you can write to me at USF, and I'd be happy to embellish what I'm saying. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Shea Quraishi.
Thank you, Rick. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today, and to the Tampa Bay Chamber and Leadership Tampa alumni for hosting this community dialogue. We are going to shift gears a bit now to focus on how we can best help children through this time of social distancing. This moment of upheaval is a chance to revisit our parenting practices and to be intentional in how we move forward. Next slide. Our kids can learn valuable life lessons during this time if we are purposeful in how we navigate it. So one way of framing this is through the lens of emotional intelligence, which includes the skills that you see here. And these are skills that kids need for success, not just in school, but also in their adult lives as community members, business leaders, productive workers, parents. And these skills require reinforcement and practice. So in other words, they take a minute to teach, but a lifetime to learn. Next slide. The bottom two rows here in green have to be in place before a child can develop the skills in the upper rows. So let's put this in the context of COVID-19. Right now, our kids have lost their foundational sense of attachment and structure. So if they were used to going to daycare or school every day, they're now missing that community that they counted on. And we also may not quite be as present for them, given our own stresses. And so even though they don't always show it, kids do feel these changes acutely. And we're also expecting them to manage new types of stresses, like learning how to use Zoom or Edsby, and they're practicing self-regulation because we're asking them to handle all of this change somewhat independently. Many of us are working from home and need to press forward with our own obligations. So before we expect kids to be resilient, we have to acknowledge the magnitude of what they're experiencing right now at a foundational level and make them feel seen and heard. Next slide. Go ahead, next slide, please. Thank you so much. This is a very emotional time. I think we can all agree, and our kids need some help navigating that. So to help children learn to process emotions, it's important to normalize all feelings. All people have them. Talking about emotions as good or bad can make it seem like some emotions shouldn't be felt, shouldn't be happening, and that can feel scary or shameful for a child. So at Frameworks instead, we suggest talking about emotions as being comfortable or uncomfortable. Second, we need to help our children understand that emotions are different from behaviors. So anger is fine, yelling or throwing something is not. We also want to help our kids understand that emotions can be mixed. We can feel sad that we miss our friends right now, but happy that we're getting more time with our families, for example. They also need our help understanding that emotions vary in intensity, and that even if an emotion feels huge right now, tomorrow it will feel less so, and so on. And for those of us with middle schoolers, this is particularly relevant when every feeling feels enormous. And this wheel can be used with children to help them explore and name their emotions, so it will be included in your resources after this webinar, along with tips on how to use it. Next slide. So you've helped your child identify his or her emotions. Now what? You've helped them name it and claim it, and now we want to tame it. So in the resources after this webinar, you'll receive a list of 50 calming strategies specifically for children. We're not born knowing these strategies. We would suggest helping your child try different ones on for fit. What works best for one person isn't what's going to work best for another. Model how to use them, and then it's a good idea to post a menu for your child that they can choose from when the time comes as you build that toolbox. If your child is younger, using visuals like you see on this slide can be helpful. If your child is older, a simple list will work just fine. Next slide. If you haven't yet established a schedule, now is the perfect time. Children thrive on stability and structure, especially during times of upheaval, because it helps bring back their sense of power and control, which we're all lacking right now, and it helps really define their new normal. Ideally, we co-create that schedule with our kids to give them a voice in the process, and then we post it to refer to throughout the day. And little tip, it might help to give younger children a timer to build responsibility and to keep us from having to nag them. Elements you might want to include in your schedule are a morning routine, which sets the tone for the day. This doesn't mean you need to make a 4-course breakfast. It can be something as simple as a walk with the dog. It's a good idea to check in daily about emotions, perhaps using the wheel we just saw, and to set goals with your child, perhaps at the start and end of the day, so that you're encouraging reflection and really building those new neural pathways that Rick spoke about. For academics, I know some of us thought at the start of this, how am I possibly going to teach 7 hours a day while also working from home? Let's revise our expectations. If you have a 6-year-old, you do not need to spend more than 2 hours on academic content. Quality over quantity. This is not the time to become the Pinterest super parent or to learn new math strategies as adults. For movement and fitness, I highly recommend many of the online resources such as GoNoodle.com and Cosmic Kids Yoga for free dance and yoga videos. Consider also including scheduled time for creative projects of your child's choosing, and be sure to set aside some time every day to connect with friends and family, because our kids need this more than ever. Technology is a wonderful resource for that. Another element you might include is service to others. So maybe work with your kids to write encouraging letters to healthcare workers, people stuck at home alone, delivery workers. This can really help your child put their own sacrifices into perspective and develop empathy for other people. And finally, continue assigning chores as you always have. This is not a time to go easy on our kids. They want the structure and consistency with their regular lives, even if they tell you they don't. And similarly, this goes for bedtime as well. So stick with your kids' regular bedtime and wake up times to ensure that they are getting enough sleep. Next slide. Here's one sample schedule. Every child is different, every family is different. So this won't be your schedule, but it can help to see ideas. So notice in the right column, this parent has given the child choices for each component. So creative time could include Legos, it could include cooking, and so forth. Giving kids choices right now gives them back some sense of agency, and it gives them ownership in how their days go. And it also makes everything a little more fun. Next slide. There are other ways to offer choice while building kids' curiosity and their sense of self-management during this time. This example shows a bingo board of sorts with choices for different activities, like create your own board game, which builds math skills, critical thinking skills, and so forth. And several of these bingo boards will be included in your emailed resources. Next slide. One of the best things that you can do for your kids right now doesn't require any planning, and it's free, and it's good old-fashioned bonding. Oxytocin is a hormone that gets released our whole lives when we experience love and bonding through physical contact or affectionate conversation, and it reduces stress on a physiological level. So that cortisol that Rick was speaking about gets lowered when oxytocin is firing. So take the time to hug your child, say I love you several times a day. Sometimes when we're so stressed or busy, it's easy to forget how important this is. I would encourage you also to notice when your child is trying hard and growing in new ways related to emotional intelligence, and let them know that you notice. So for example, you might say, I noticed you moved on to your next part of your schedule without being reminded. Nice job. And finally, I would encourage you all to remember that even during normal times, there is no such thing as perfect parenting. That's certainly true now as well. So please show yourself some grace. And with that, I'll turn it back to Amanda. I think.
Thank you for warning me that I was muted. Sorry about that. Thank you both for giving us that information. We are going to turn to our questions now, and please, if you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function, and we will get to as many of those as we can. To start off with, for Rick, what are some good coping strategies that can help us get through this new normal of social distancing, wearing masks, and facing a continual barrage of sad and scary news?
Well, the first is to be aware of your surroundings from a reasonable, rational, logical perspective, and not go through any of those catastrophizing things that we talked about earlier. There's a lot out there to do. Thinking of our homes, not being stuck in our homes, but rather being safe in our homes. Problem solving with your family or with other people. Some fun, interesting, novel things that you can do to cut the undesirable aspects of the confinement and the social distancing. This is a special time in our lives. Hopefully we'll be creating some memories that we'll be able to look back upon and smile about them, rather than look back upon them and be afraid or be upset. So giving some time to think about those wonderful activities that Shea described, and others that will boost the amount of pleasure that you're experiencing, and using good logic and reason, not letting different catastrophizing news or websites or things that have not been vetted by the CDC or WHO. Don't let these things get under your skin and make what's already a challenging situation a whole lot worse. Shea?
Yes, and I would add, I think right now a lot of us are feeling a bit out of control, understandably. And it's important to remember that our kids are looking to us to stay behind the steering wheel and continue steering the ship and maintain some control in a sense. So it's important to think about how we frame all of this, not only in our own minds and reframing our thinking, but in how we speak with our kids about it.
And building on that, Shea, how can we help our kids stay connected to friends and family during this time?
Our kids, just like many of us, are craving staying connected with friends and family. And fortunately, there are many ways to do this. So with the family with whom you're isolating, as Rick mentioned, this is valuable time to build memories, like playing board games together, eating dinner together, have a dance party, really connect. But for friends and family outside of your home, you can certainly do FaceTime or Zoom calls, but you can also get creative. So send them on a virtual museum tour with someone. Many museums are offering these for free these days on their website. Set up a virtual game tournament using a platform like Jackbox or a trivia night. You can have dinner virtually with someone. Leave a note for a friend in sidewalk chalk. Sit on opposite ends of your yard or porch if you're comfortable doing so and it's safe for your context. Maybe teach your child how to have a good old-fashioned phone call, which builds their social awareness and relationship skills. And frankly, many of our kids these days have not done that without the FaceTime component. And at the end of the day, your kids want to be connected with you. They want to feel reassured by you. And so make sure that you're thinking about that oxytocin piece, physically being present, and establishing routines where you can spend that bonding time together without screens.
Great. And Rick, we're getting bombarded from all sides on things that we need to do, actions we need to take, and decisions we have to make. How can we distinguish between information that is accurate and helpful from other advice that might be well-intentioned but not based on good science?
Yeah, to me, that's a critical question with regard to keeping sane during this time. To me, the best way to discern the unnecessarily upsetting from the helpful, is to use your own common sense. We want to activate our prefrontal cortex, and we want to use that activation to deactivate our amygdala. And the more that we can resort to tried and true ideas that we've had even before COVID, to talk to friends who you know have good judgment, who are educated, who keep up with the CDC and the WHO daily newscasts. Or, I guess they put out briefs every day on how to stay safe. These are the most reliable. Those scientists are vetted. The information that they put out is vetted by good science. And to me, that's what I depend on, and not well-intentioned friends. Also, let me add to the earlier question that went to Shea. One of the folks that I work with gave me just some really good ideas about staying connected with neighbors. What she did was, after talking to the parents, she came up with a scavenger hunt that all of the homes on her street that had kids could participate in, where she came up with 20 different items that are typically found in people's homes. And she said, okay, at the particular time, say at 12 noon, this coming Wednesday, we're gonna start. And you've got to find all these 20 things. You've got to lay them out on your dining room table, and then you have to take a picture of them and you have to send it to me. And the first family that gets back to me with all 20 items laid out in a row, you're going to get a free pizza delivered to your house. So, and she's changed that up, different days, different scavenger hunts, different games. And she doesn't have any kids, but she's doing this for the neighbors. So that combines sort of giving of your own talents and your own cleverness and ingenuity to others. At the same time, it's benefiting your neighbors. So just thought I'd pass that one along as well.
That's great. Thank you, Rick. And Shea, kind of along the lines of what we asked Rick, with our kids maybe hearing things from other friends or in the media, how do we talk to our kids about social distancing and the coronavirus?
Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I would say before you even have that conversation, make sure you're in the right headspace and you've done something to quell your own anxiety first. And then I would say be honest with them, but keep it age appropriate and stick to the facts. So this means acknowledging to them that there is a virus that people can catch if they're too close to someone else who has it. And so we're staying safe by staying at home, by washing our hands, and other families are doing this too. And that's important to acknowledge because some of our kids might not have put that together. And for older children, you can even show charts and talk about flattening the curve and to help them understand the importance of social distancing. For teens who might feel invincible, it's important to show them that this is about more than just them. And regardless of your child's age, they want reassurance. So tell them that adults like scientists and healthcare workers are working very hard to keep everyone safe and that they will be fine. But the conversation can't stop there. So it's important to ask your kids what questions they have. That part can feel kind of scary because what if we can't answer them? But it's crucial to give your kids a chance to express their worries and their questions. And if you don't know the answer, do a research project together or tell them you'll look into it and you don't know yet. And then look to one of those reputable sources like Rick mentioned, like the CDC, WHO, NIH, and ask your kids how they're feeling about this. If they are still building that emotional vocabulary, maybe have them draw or write about it before they talk to you. That can be a great way of expressing where they are. And then if they express an uncomfortable emotion, like worry or fear, this is really tough, but rather than minimizing it or trying to excuse it away, really hear them acknowledge it and validate it. So that might sound like, I can understand why you would feel worried. The idea of getting sick is really scary, so it's normal to be worried. And I'm here to listen anytime you want to talk about it, and we will keep doing what we need to do to stay safe. So notice I didn't say, but, or you should feel this way instead, but really just hearing and acknowledging. And then finally, remember that our kids are getting information through the cracks as well. So if you and your partner are talking about this, or you're on the phone with a friend talking about COVID-19, your kids are listening. If you have the news on in the background, they are listening, even if you don't think they are. So it's a good idea to monitor how much information you're taking in, both for your own wellness and because of that element. So maybe instead of scrolling social media about it all day or having our news on in the background, maybe just designate a half hour to yourself every day to check in on the latest information from reputable sources.
Let me just underscore, if I may, the wisdom in what Shea just mentioned, particularly the part about when your children are afraid or when they're worried. I completely agree with what Shea said about honoring their fear. I don't think it's helpful, as Shea mentioned, to say, oh, don't be afraid. That's not a good thing. Rather, we want our kids, I would imagine that you want to train and reinforce in your kids to become little problem solvers. So as Shea said, so, okay, yeah, I can understand you're afraid and I can understand what you're worried about. So let's see what we can do about those fears. Let's see what we can do about those worries. Okay, if you're worried about whatever it is, let's go wash our hands right now. Let's put some sanitizer on right now so that, and then when we're done with that, what we want to do to embellish that connection between our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's action center, thinking through, strategizing, and the pleasure centers, we want to say something along the lines of, wow, now doesn't that feel a whole lot better? Way to go in taking some action to make your worries a little bit less, so that kids can feel, as a result of what they're doing, they're feeling good. They want to develop that talent over the whole course of their life.
That's great. And we're starting to get some questions coming in. And this one, I think you'll both have some insight on. So what are some suggestions to mitigate rebellious teenage behavior while in quarantine?
Rick, you want to?
Sure.
Okay.
Rebellious teenage behavior, oppositional behavior. This gives me an opportunity to talk about something that I didn't have a chance to say during those opening remarks. That's really important. I would take the opportunity when your kids are demonstrating annoyance or irritation with you or with confinement and they're acting it out all over the place, to sort of take a deep breath, calm down, try to diminish any anger or annoyance you feel with them, and say, son or girl, let's sit down and have a talk right now. This was the part about having intimate conversations. And then asking them what's going on. If it's accurate, to say, I've noticed lately you haven't really been yourself. You've been more oppositional. You've been shouting at me. You seem to be confining yourself. And what's going on? It's concerning me. It's worrying me. And so I really want to say, how really are you feeling? What's going on in your head these days? And then when they talk, listen carefully, listen lovingly. Look them in their eyes, shake your head, be understanding through your facial expressions, through your body language, through the tone of your voice. Say things like, thank you for being honest with me and telling me really the way it is. It's good for me to know. Now let's figure out together how you can get more of what you need from me and how I can get more of what I need from you and what we all need from each other right now. Let's problem solve this together. Not, I'm going to tell you what you need to do right now. Let's us talk with one another and figure things out so all of us can feel better. And then as hopefully this deeper, more intimate conversation plays out and you're starting to see results, be very on top of going back to that teenager and saying, thank you. You know, a couple of days ago, you know, we were both feeling upset with one another, but we both talked about it and we both worked it out. And it just makes me love you that much more. And how much I respect your abilities to listen and cooperate. And the more we can work this together, the better we're all going to be. Once again, to try to embellish that connection between prefrontal cortex and the reward centers.
Wonderful. And I would simply add, in addition to starting with listening and having those conversations, as Rick is advising, it can help to share the facts without lecturing to your teen, but to talk with them and look at the science together. Our teens can feel invincible. Sometimes they don't understand why this should all apply to them. I feel fine, mom or dad, and really look at the flattening the curve, understanding that this virus is exponential, connecting it back to the folks that we love, such as our grandparents, and, you know, explaining that we might be asymptomatic carriers and we would never want to put them at risk or anyone else who's in an at-risk category. But certainly hearing and validating their disappointment, their frustration, they're not getting to see their friends right now, and keeping in mind that if they were spending a lot of their time being social and out with their friends, they're going to need to build some other habits to replace those and to fill up the time in their day. So helping them explore what those habits are, and build schedules and build plans for doing that, whether it's a creative project or learning a new language or whatever goals they might have for themselves. But encouraging those healthy habits during this time, just as we have, as adults, are having to kind of reconfigure what our days and our new normal looks like. That's going to be important.
One last comment about this on this question, Amanda. When you're noticing that your children are acting and they're getting under your skin, the first thing that you do before you approach them is you take a deep breath. The second thing you do before you talk to them is just bring to mind, take 5 seconds to bring to mind very, very quickly all of the things that you love about your child, all of the things that make them dear, that are endearing about them, and just sort of wash your brain. That triggers your pleasure centers, by the way, and it opens up your capacity to listen to them and to not be operating from your amygdala that's making you angry and making you say things that you regret. You want to go to them within a climate that you create, a climate of love.
And I see a question here that I was actually just chatting with the panelists about before we started the webinar, but how do we will ourselves to get up when we feel so zapped with energy? And that was asked by us by a UT professor who has a bunch of his students on the call too, that are dealing with a lot of the loss of their graduation and everything like that. So what are some of the things that we can do for ourselves to help us keep going?
Shea, do you want to take that, or would you like me to start?
We can volley either way.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, to those students at UT, my heart goes out to you. I am a professor as well, and I'm very aware of the vast amount of disappointment that's out there. People aren't going to be able to go to their own commencements, and the disappointment is very, very real. And it's not uncommon for a sense of loss of things like this to zap us, as you mentioned, Amanda, to rob us of our energy. There are a number of things that I would recommend. First is to talk about these things with other people who are sharing that same sense of loss and disappointment. Sort of when you commiserate together, you develop a sense of connection and joining, which, despite the physical distancing that we're experiencing, does not have to mean we are social distancing. So connecting around that shared emotion and being able to feel that sense that we're all in this together, that's number one. Number two, willing ourselves is actually not a bad idea. We can set up little rewards in our environment to, if we can just get our walking or running shoes on and get out and just go for 15 minutes. And then we can come back in and have a jelly bean or something that's pleasing to you. Setting up, and in fact, speaking about these little strategies to other people in our social network so they can also be reinforcing and rewarding of the things that we need to do for our own health. Remembering we're on our best game when we get enough sleep, when we get enough nutrition, when we get enough exercise, and when we get enough social contact, relational connections, and working very hard to maintain all of those in the big four.
Absolutely, and I will echo Rick's understanding that this is difficult for those who are looking forward to graduating right now. And certainly I think connecting with folks who are in the same boat can be valuable. And I'm sorry that that is the case for those of you experiencing this. I would also advocate thinking about some positive self-talk that you might use to yourself. Maybe if you're feeling that need for, the validation for all of the hard work that you've put in, maybe it's, I still did the work. I still earned this. This doesn't take away the fact that you put in years of work to get to this place. Maybe it's planning ahead so that you have something to look forward to commemorate in a ritualistic way the fact that you reached this momentous benchmark. So maybe it's planning something for a year from now even. Maybe it's doing a Zoom graduation party with key family and friends. But having something to look forward to still to commemorate this. Another thing that I personally find helpful is to have ongoing projects and sources of joy that I know that I can return to. So instead of making my creative outlet for a day, a quick one-time drawing, for example, I'm personally trying embroidery. That takes forever, it turns out, but it's something that I know I can return to day after day when I need a mind break and to get my creative juices flowing. So it's something that's just there for me. So ongoing projects can be really helpful. Also, going back to scheduling, make a schedule that is something you personally enjoy. That's one of the perks of this time is you have flexibility to arrange everything in a way that works for you. So if you're not a morning person, don't promise that you're gonna hit the ground running with the emails at 7 a.m. Ease into your morning, have your coffee, play with your dog, whatever brings you joy first thing, and then get into the work. So think about how you've configured your schedule and if maybe there's a way to figure that in a way that makes you more look forward to getting out of bed.
Can I just add one last comment to Shea's wisdom? And it's related to two things that we talked about earlier. Number one, using this time during COVID to work on things that you want to develop even after COVID is over. And the second thing is savoring. So when you play with your dog or play with your child, or when you get involved in a new skill like embroidery, you absolutely, I've been studying the brain a lot, and I've been studying a lot about how it helps with health. You cannot do anything better for yourself than after you've just completed your first lesson on how to embroider something, pause, reflect on what you're doing, and say to yourself, you don't say it out loud, you don't get a megaphone to tell the world, but you say to yourself, what I'm doing is really, really cool. This is really good for me. This is making me feel wonderful. And you want to juice your dopamine. You want to get that dopamine flowing, because when you do, you are boosting your immunities like crazy. You are helping the very arteries that bring blood to your coronary vascular system. You're helping those enlarge. You are reversing the damage that stress and cortisol and the other stress hormones are doing to your body. the more that you can feel this dopamine rush based legitimately on things that you are doing, it is the best anti-anxiety, the best antidepressant, the best thing you can do for your body, for your mind, and for your spirit, bar none.
And this goes into, I think, one of the other questions we have. So we also have many adults who have found themselves furloughed or out of work for the first time in their whole working lives. Do you have any tips or suggestions as to what they can do to help themselves, as well as their family members who are depending on them at this time?
Yeah. Shea?
Yes, I'm looking at actually our chat here and seeing that some helpful resources have been shared. So I just want to call attention to that. Certainly beyond our conversation today, those resources might be helpful for everyone to browse. It's tough, and unfortunately, that's not uncommon. There are a lot of folks who are going through that right now, and while that is an unfortunate thing, it does mean that there are chances, like Rick mentioned, to connect with others who are going through the same thing. And that can be very reassuring. Additionally, not catastrophizing, as Rick mentioned, that comes into this as well, and really using those affirmations and self-talk. And while it's unfortunate, and I don't want to, at Frameworks, we joke, we don't want to silver lining it. Brene Brown talks about silver lining not being a verb, but I don't want to silver lining it. However, sometimes when you are given lemons, it's important to think about what aspects of that can be put into lemonade. And frankly, it is an opportunity to reevaluate who we want to be personally, professionally, and that goes for all of us, whether we have been furloughed or not, but really revisiting our values, whether that's as parents or as employees, and thinking about what values, what practices we want to carry forward, how we want to spend our time moving forward in an intentional way. Journaling can be a wonderful way to reflect on all of that. That goes for our teens as well, by the way. So for those who are curious about how to help our teens are still figuring out who they are without their screens and without their parties with their friends. And it's very important to encourage that reflection and that self-awareness. But that's something that has to be practiced our whole lives. That's what emotional intelligence is all about. It's practicing. And so really trying to use it, as unfortunate as it is, and I express my condolences, and maybe we can find ways to use it as an opportunity for reflection.
Yeah, very, very wise. May I add, with issues like this, Amanda, where somebody has been furloughed or somebody has been laid off, I try to think in terms of 4 different sets of resources that we have. We have cognitive resources, and I think Shea addressed that, trying not to catastrophize, trying to look on the bright side without being Pollyanna about it. Cognitive resources. We have emotional resources where you join with other people, as she mentioned, and talk about your situation together and feel some sense of positive connection there. We have behavioral things. It's cognitive, emotional, behavioral. So as I mentioned, I've got a nephew who is 24 years old. He graduated from college. He's back home with his parents now because he got laid off. But what he's doing is he's decided he's always wanted to learn about high tech, and he wants to prepare himself. So he's taking an online course right now, and he's getting some skills together that he didn't have the opportunity to do before. So cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and the last one is relational. There is an extremely valuable amount of support that we have in our own environments to go to when we're feeling down and we're feeling blue. We're getting towards the end, and I wanted to have an opportunity to read this quote. And so this would be let me take this opportunity to read it. This is a quote from Dr. Dean Ornish. For those of you who aren't familiar, Dr. Ornish is probably the premier cardiologist in the country. He was the first doctor to show we could actually reverse coronary vascular disease. So he's built this whole realm of interventions and science on reversing coronary artery disease. But when asked about what is the most important ingredient in this world to improve one's health, he didn't look at what's inside of your body. Here's what Dr. Ornish said. There's no other factor in medicine, not diet, not smoking, not exercise, not stress, not genetics, not drugs, not surgery, that affects our health and quality and length of life more profoundly than, guess what? It's a four-letter word that starts with an L. Than feeling loved and cared for. The best medicine for the heart, and I would add, for the body, is love. If you find it's not working yet, just increase the dose.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Rick. And as you mentioned, we do only have a couple minutes left. There are two questions that came in that I think are good to end on because they're about looking forward. So I'm going to read both of them and then you guys can kind of give your thoughts. So the two questions were, what strategies can you suggest for embracing the inevitable changes that are to come as we move forward? And the second one, a little more specifically, when the curfew is over and we return to our normal, how should we address business connections if our job includes shaking hands and entertaining clients? How can we recognize if they have a concern about physical contact? So I'll open it up to both of you.
Shea?
Sure. It's funny to think about looking forward right now because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm kind of just assuming this is it for a while. But there is definite value in looking forward. One, I would say, let's focus right now on making the most of right now and not worrying too much of that. Trust in yourself that you will be able to navigate the things like returning to handshaking. I know it's everybody's going to settle back in when that time comes at a different pace, and they're going to have different things that make them comfortable or uncomfortable. And hopefully we will all be so thrilled to be back in a social context and back to our old normal, that we won't mind navigating all of those nuances. So certainly trust in yourself with that. I would encourage you all right now to focus on the life lessons that we can learn with our kids and as ourselves, and keeping in mind for those of us who are parents and helping kids navigate this, it's important to remember that metaphor of the oxygen mask on the airplane. So they always tell us, put on your own oxygen mask first before you help others. That goes for your own self-care and wellness and taking care of your stress levels right now in order to do better for others. So our kids are watching how we carry ourselves right now. And when we return to face-to-face business contexts, hopefully soon, others will be watching how we carry ourselves as well. And so really starting with yourself, thinking about how you are carrying yourselves and modeling a return to normalcy and an empathy with others who might not be quite returning at the same pace, that's going to be crucial.
Yeah, let me just add in the brief moment that we have left, with regards to how we're going to be able to greet our social and business contacts again. Two things. One, there are many ways that we can show in our facial expressions, in our body language, in our voice tone, that we're very happy, that we're really glad to see a friend or a business associate again after a long period of time away. So smile, show enthusiasm with your voice, with your body language. And I suspect, just like we came up with the elbow bump prior to this, there will be some other way that's going to develop that we're going to be able to have a brief little touch in ways that are safe until that day comes when we're able to get back and we're able to shake hands again and hug again without any concerns about any danger.
Well, thank you both. This was an hour that went by very quickly. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but I want to thank you all for joining us today, especially Rick and Shea, for everything that you have shared with us. Thank you so much for your time. For those of you who have coworkers or friends who you wish would have attended to get this information, the webinar was recorded and will be shared on the Tampa Bay Chamber's website. Additionally, Rick and Shea, as they talked about through the session, have shared with us some additional resources. We're going to, and their slides are going to be made available to all of our attendees in a separate email, and we'll be sharing those resources also on social media. I also wanted to point out, the Crisis Center, Dial 211 is a very important resource if you're feeling like you need someone to talk to there. And Florida Blue has a free emotional support helpline. So please, if you feel you need to reach out, get help. And thank you all. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.